So today I've got a 323 CI with a pretty unknown history in for an engine change. However, the gauge cluster, all of the needles look like they're having issues. The tachometer is basically pinned against the MPG. The temp gauge is sitting up. This thing's got electrical system problems. So I'm going to try to identify what those are before I go any further, just in case this car is a total loss. It should be unfortunate because the body's actually really nice on it. But I gotta let this battery charge a little bit and see if I can get this engine cranking. So here she is, 2000 323 CI. Again, the body's actually in pretty nice condition. And even though the owner of this car, a friend of mine, is not the one that maintained it, I think the people he brought it to were questionable because of things like this holding the radiator in. Zip ties I won't fault him for, because even I do that, but I'm going to be digging into this more and more. This looks okay up here, but I pulled the dipstick and it's not good looking in there, so I think the head gasket did pop. I'm noticing things like the upper radiator hose aren't even clipped onto the radiator anymore, so that's a little sketch. So yeah, I'm just gonna start tearing down the front end of this car and we'll see where we end up, really. But pretty much no matter what, the thing needs a motor, which is perfect because I happen to have one. And even though I just did a ZHP swapped 325 wagon last week that I really didn't take much of any video on just because I was cranking through, I figure as long as I video one of these two swaps, you guys won't be too mad at me, because these are identical engines basically, even though this is technically an M52TU and the other one's an M54. Really the only differences are the throttle body on this one is cable actuated, even though it's still electronic, and the other car is drive-by-wire. That's really it. Everything else, other than the plugs being a slightly different shape and the coils being a little bit different shape, same engine. So, yep, what I'm gonna do off camera here is radiator shroud and fan. This is a manual, so it's got an electric fan right here instead of up here, and then it has no hydraulic clutch fan. Radiator upper hose, there's 3 quick disconnects. I'm gonna do the lower hose, which there are 2 disconnects and a small electronic plug, which of course you can't see, but it's right there. Air box, 2 10mm, 2 clips I already popped. 1 clip on the mass airflow sensor. Take that out. Then I'm going to be taking off the 2 beauty covers, which are, just grab a little screwdriver under each one of these, or if you have manly fingers like me, just pull them out. 10 mil, 10 mil, 10 mil, 10 mil. Take off this wiring loom cover up here. Small flat blade screwdriver in this crack here. Push in, this pulls out. Same on that side. Then you pull this weather strip off. And then there are 3 90-degree turn clips. This comes off, the cabin filter comes out. Below this, there are a series of T30 Torx. Take those off, this whole tray will then lift out. Beneath that, there's another piece of plastic on the firewall that's got 2 T30s on it. Then that lifts out. After that, you'll be able to get access to this black piece here, which first up, take this weather strip off, set it to the side. There's 2 quarter turn thumb screws here as well. These are really tricky, don't lose them because they'll pop out. There's 1 here, there's 1 back there. And then you can lift that carefully out of the way once you get the wires moved. Then you'll have pretty good access to everything around the engine. A secondary air pump, this bad boy. 1 hose here. And then there's going to be a series of 10mm bolts. 1 right down there, 2 holding on there, 1 there. Then there's an electrical connector on the bottom. Disconnect that, set it aside, taking up too much room. And then, yeah, really once you're there, you can start inspecting stuff, taking your belts off, but I'll get back on video before I get that far. Just wanted to kind of walk you through if you are dealing with a nuked M52TU or 54, which is pretty common because cooling system negligence happens. That's clearly what happened on this car. Poor engine, but yeah, this will be an interesting process, and like I said, I'll just try to document as much as I can just so there's something out there that you can refer to if you are in the same boat as this customer. So I'm at that point. The only other thing I've done beyond what I was telling you about in the previous little segment was I took the alternator out. That's going to give me access to the power steering pump, at least the top bolts here. Usually when I'm doing a swap like this, I'll leave the power steering and the air conditioning in the car. That way I don't have to deal with any additional labor or other stuff that might go wrong, especially in a case like this where, you know, we're still kind of penny pinching to try to get this car back on the road for him. So I've loosened everything. This plate back here is loose. This here is pretty much ready to come out of the way. You will have to move a couple of these cables to get this plate out, but it's really not too bad. But it just gives you such better access to like the heater core lines and pretty much everything else back there. I'm not sure how the battery charger is doing, but I really won't be able to fire it up or even try to much after this point. So I'll probably hop back in the car and see if it'll run. Nope. I tried. I was noticing this car has a sedan late model gauge cluster in it, and it's an early model coupe. So that's a little bit terrifying. Not exactly sure what's going on there, but something is not right. Bummer. This is the messiest E46 I have ever worked on. This thing is disgusting. Unbolted the AC compressor, set it aside. Unbolted the engine ground strap, set it aside. Got the third and final bolt on the power steering, which is right there, off. Power steering is now just sitting here. Took the slave cylinder off, which on this, it's got a Getrag 250s, so there's plenty of room. Those two guys right there. Reverse light switch right up there, pulled that off. Fuel lines I marked, bottom and top in 3 places. It's a good thing I did because it's already wearing off. Gasoline's an excellent cleaning agent. There's the 2 fuel lines. If you're working on a later model car, there will only be 1. It'll be a returnless system, so that's easy. These are non-factory hardware, and there's a ton of RTV all over them, so that's scary. I doused them in PB Blaster, but I'm gonna have to get my not blowtorch. I have a electromagnetic induction heater called a mini ductor. I'm gonna have to get that and bring it out to break that corrosion. Otherwise, there's just no hope of me getting that out. And that's really one of the next steps here. I really have to pull the exhaust out before I can pull any of the driveline. And I have to pull the driveline to get the trans out, and I gotta pull the trans out to pull the engine. So, just sort of a list of things that I have to do sequentially. And I really can't finish almost any of them right now, so I'm just looking over the car to see what additionally I can do right now. I've actually got a ton of progress done over the last hour. Yeah, I'm gonna have a word with the owner of this car, because this job's gonna be a little bit more expensive than I quoted out because of how nasty it is. It'll still be much better than going somewhere else, but wow, I cannot believe how I wiped like 1/4 inch of crap off this sway bar. And this is all leaking coolant, leaking oil, leaking power steering pump, and then just road grime accumulating, compounding. Especially a contrast after working on that wagon, which is 100,000 mile, super clean. Anyway, I'm boring you guys to death, I'm sure, but that's probably as far as I can get today. Just gonna finish up the wagon, which is sitting outside right now. That needed to get the ECU flashed and back from Canada, so that's here. I'm just gonna finish that up, get him on his way, swap into some dirtier clothes, get my electric induction wrench, and keep going. So I've got this exhaust off. Those 4 front nuts were pretty nuts. Anyway, this one had definitely been replaced before with a straight up bolt. Actually, I had to weld the bolt in place to get that off. I used a combination of my magnetic induction heater, which I just brought, wrapped around the studs, superheated it, and then also some PB Blaster, which I put on yesterday. But there's the hardware, one of the gaskets. Once the exhaust is off there, there's two main panels that run across there to there and there to there, one of which you can still see on the exhaust itself. And then typically at the back, there's two 13 mils on that bracket and two on this. This car has a wicked sick custom exhaust, so it only had one 13 hanging onto it. And then you can just wiggle the whole thing out. If it's a factory system, you're gonna either need two people or a hydraulic transmission jack, because it's heavy. This one is only like 30 pounds, because the heavy rear end was all cut off. Then above that, there's this aluminum heat shield, which has just got four, of course I just dumped them off by doing that. It has four coarse thread steel screws, two on the front, and then two buried way at the back. That comes off. Then you've got two 13 mils for your center support bearing right there. If you've got a Getrag 250, which is a 323 or 325, 18 mil fasteners. I think they're either 18 or 19 on the ZFs, on the other stuff as well. So zip those out. You don't have to take all six out, just choose. Oh wow, that is terrifyingly loose. Holy cow, oh my word. That's really scary. That whole thing needs to get tightened down. The whole output shaft is wobbly on this transmission. Yikes, okay. Sorry, I digress. You only have to take 3 of them out, so either the drive shaft or the transmission. Set the drive shaft aside with the zip tie or something, or take it out if you want. Now I'm gonna go for the transmission. Typically, there's gonna be 3 little guys, here, here, and here. 2 of the long big guys, so the third size, there and here. And then up at the top, you can see one right there. And one right there. And then there's 2 middle size on the starter, which I'll try to focus on here. One there and one there. If your clutch has never been serviced before or it's been done at a dealer, there's also a 10mm hex right there typically. This does not have that. I never put that back in because it's just hateful and it's useless. So, yeah, that's what I'm gonna do now. I'm gonna start with the little guys on the bottom, work my way up to the 2 big deep ones, and the 2 big shallow ones on the top. 2 starter bolts. Make sure my starter's wiggled out. Then I'm gonna get my transmission jack in here and rip this Getrag off. Transmission is out. I will say I do like working on the Getrag cars because everything's just that much easier to get at. I hope this comes across in the video, but there shouldn't be any movement there. There's a good amount of movement there, so this transmission's a little bit sketchy. I'm gonna try to tighten down that output shaft, and then I'll probably refill the fluid too, because it's probably never been done. After that, 6 6mm hexes to pull the pressure plate off the clutch disc and flywheel. And then there's gonna be 8 19mm bolts holding the flywheel onto the actual crankshaft. I'm gonna be taking all of that off, and then once all that's off, I'll be going up to the lower motor mounts, little nut in there, which is a 16. I'm gonna loosen those almost all the way, but I'm not gonna take them off. And then on the top side, I'm gonna take them all the way off. Once I've done all that, I'm gonna double check everything, look at all the hoses on the top side, but I'm pretty sure at that point I will be ready to lift the engine out of the car. And then I'll start prepping the new engine over there. Flywheel's off, pallet bearing feels okay. Everything looks reasonable down here. On the early model cars, there's gonna be a vacuum line down here. Or actually that's evap. And then you're gonna have a vacuum line here, and then you're gonna have a 2-pin power plug there. That's underneath this little piece of metal, which is held on with a bunch of 8 mils. Once you're done with that, again, undo but not remove the lower motor mount bolts. And then let's go up top and deal with the heater core and all the other kind of stuff up there. So back top side, normally you don't have to disconnect the heater core hoses, but my harness actually was running underneath those, so I did need to. If you have an MS42 cable throttle car, you're gonna see the throttle cable going in right there. Just pull it toward you, out, up, over to the side, and then manually grab the throttle disc and open it all the way up, which I can't show you. But once it's all the way pulled open, then you can wrap the cable around the bottom edge and pull it away. If that's at all confusing, you can just take the DISA off, take the boot off, take the throttle body off, and leave the throttle body in the car, basically. But at this point, she's, I think, ready to go. I've got both the motor mount nuts off. I've got everything I can see disconnected. AC is sitting, power steering is sitting, ground's disconnected, fuel's disconnected. So I'm gonna put a strap on it and start lifting and see what goes wrong. Well, so far, pretty clean extraction. The only snag I ran into was somebody had zip tied. I'm blanking on what this connects to. Somebody had zip tied this to the heater valve wiring, so I had to cut that zip tie. But everything that was factory supposed to be there has come off nice. I didn't forget anything. Everything looks okay. The back side of the engine, luckily, looks better than the front. Yeah, she's a turd. She's absolutely blown. But also, pro tip, if you're gonna take one of these out with these $2 Harbor Freight ratchet straps, which I do all the time, run one from the back eyelet to the front eyelet and grab right after it, and then run a second one from this up top to keep the engine straight up and down. If you don't do that, you're gonna catch on your steering shaft pretty badly with the oil pan. So this lifted right out. It took maybe 15 seconds to get it from the mounts to right here. So yeah, that's what I would recommend doing. So I've got the old engine here. Haven't done much to it except I moved everything to get the fuel injector electronics off. Then I pulled all of the oxygen sensor wiring off of this side. I also went in and took the bitch bolt out right there. So this is pretty much loose. There's one other connector in there for the cam sensor. On this engine, the only thing I've done so far is drain the oil out of it because it was full. Took the old oil filter housing gasket out of it, which was, I've seen worse, but definitely needed replacement. Just took the thermostat and water pump off. Here's our old ones. These actually didn't look too bad. Looking for a date. I don't know. Thermostat says 2009 on it. This is still in pretty good condition. But throw in a new thermostat, a Whaler, and then a new FMI metal water pump in it. After that, I'll be doing the pan gasket and kind of just checking it over. But once those few items are done, I'm going to take the intake manifold assembly off with as much as I possibly can, including the starter, from this engine and just plop it straight onto this. It just keeps the work minimal, at least as minimal as it can be, and keeps kind of the variables low, because I know for sure that the customer said this ran, so if I don't have to touch anything else, it should just slot back in and fire up. This engine is super healthy. It's about 106,000 miles. It was out of a 323 wagon that actually got hit in the back. For quite a while it had a Vortex supercharger on it. So it's gonna live a pretty under-stressed life, but I figure if it didn't have any issues with a blower on it, it'll probably be just fine rolling around with a bone stock 323 coupe. Yeah, next up I'm just gonna shove the water pump and thermostat in there. And like I said, I'll flip it over, do the pan gasket, maybe I'll show you what it's like in there, and once all that's done, throw the intake on it, and maybe think about bolting the exhaust manifolds on. That's going to be a little tricky because it's actually leaning on them right now. That's really not a good way for me to do that, but maybe a combination of straps and we'll figure it out. Not too worried. Bottom end actually looks pretty darn good. Oil pump nuts not spinning, that's good. Old pan gasket, I mean, they never really look bad when you take them out, but they definitely do age. So I'm gonna crack open the new VR and chuck it on in there. Brand new tasty water pump, new Whaler thermostat. It's gonna be nice. Brand new distance radiator, new Luke clutch, new Melee expansion tank. This thing is getting better treatment than it deserves, truly. Sheesh. Well, since this old engine had a bad head gasket, it's really dumb to not change out the CCV oil separator system. And I'm glad it did. After pulling the hoses off, they're all pretty nasty looking inside. Just ish. And I cannot even imagine what's in the bottom of this thing. So, not to mention this is a Minnesota car, even though it doesn't see winter. It isn't the cold weather version, which has this large insulation all over it. And this supposedly is just to kind of keep the whole system up to temperature when it's really cold outside, to keep it from freezing and rendering it useless. So now that I've got all that out, I'm gonna replace all that old and busted with all this new hotness. Okay, back at it. So the new engine is all dressed up, ready for the ball. Just got the exhaust put back on, transferred over one of the engine mount arms that was missing, connected all the wiring. It's got a whole bunch of new stuff. Did that cold weather CCV, all the tubes on top of it and stuff are brand new. This thing, again, way better than the car deserves. But that's what we're throwing in. So I found out earlier this morning when I took it out that the engine mount, what used to be an engine mount, is basically in two pieces. So I'm gonna look around here, see if I have something that'll work. If I don't, then I'm just gonna pump it full of epoxy and put it back in, because that's really my only option right now. Not ideal, but it's better than not having an engine mount in place, and that can always be changed out later in the car anyway. Sheesh, everything's just a mess. But yeah, I think we're pretty much ready to dump that thing in. I really want to autopsy this blown up engine, but I really don't want to have time to do that until this car is done and out. But I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's going to be real nice. And just like that, she's in. I ended up just pumping that mount full of epoxy, so that should, if anything, be a little bit better, more similar to the group end mounts. I've got the studs poking through both motor mount arms, so it's sitting on the mounts. Everything lined up pretty well. Nothing got pinched, nothing got clipped. So now it's just a whole bunch of reconnecting, going back underneath, throwing the plate back on it. What else? Lots of stuff. The new clutch, gonna tighten down the heater hoses. Lots of plastic pieces to put back on ECU. But I don't know, another probably 4 hours cranking on this thing and she'll be completely done, ready to go. So I'm sure the owner will be thrilled, and you can actually like touch parts of this engine bay without getting totally blackened. That old engine, boy, that thing's a leaky turd. So hopefully he's happy with it, and this is the last major project I've got as far as maintenance work is concerned. Getting back to the turbo wagon Brexit probably after this. Been mid next week, a really cool stroker E46 535 coming in for some work. Just stuff here and there, but this thing still has a little ways to go yet. I'll still follow up and let you guys know if it runs. Well, we're back bottom side. I've put the new clutch in. Self-adjusting clutches, boy, those are just stupid, let me tell you. I've got this stuff reconnected here. I do have to put the metal plate back on over the fuel filter and vacuum lines. Next up for me though, is gonna be jamming the transmission back on this car. I did, remember that nasty wobble? I took the flex disc all the way off, but I have a 1 1/16 deep 1/2-inch socket that I got from Craftsman about a decade ago to do an output flange swap on a Getrag 260 for an E30 to E21 swap, and that actually fit. So I fixed it. I've put a dab of molybdenum grease on the nose of the input shaft just to help it center into the pilot bearing. Got the new release bearing in there. Everything's looking pretty good, so knock on wood, light near the end of the tunnel. Somebody definitely did this center support bearing though. Wow, that's brand new. So yeah, once the trans is back in, all that's bolted up. Throw in the big aluminum heat shield that goes under here, bolt up the drive shaft, bolt up the transmission cross member, bolt up the exhaust, and then we'll go topside and do cooling system and a few other things up there. And then it'll be the moment of truth, trying to fire it up and see if this piece of shit runs. So that's what I'm gonna go ahead and do. So it's back together now, at least to the point where I can try to start it. We'll see. Definitely got a misfire.